I'm fortunate to deliver the talk this morning. First, my thanks and gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the opportunity to deliver the talk. Secondly, my thanks to the committee of the Jamaat for this opportunity. And of course, my thanks to Sheikh Moiz for his assistance in selecting the Quranic verses, which I will be reciting as we progress with the talk. The topic of today's talk is Taqwa, and also, if time allows, pursuit of happiness. We often hear from the sheikhs and Maulanas about taqwa, to adopt or to acquire taqwa. But taqwa is obviously a very wide topic, and I haven't heard myself, it may be me, to see whether the sheikhs and the Maulanas, obviously they don't have enough time, like in khutbah, Juma khutbah, they have to recite so many other things. Taqwa is an Arabic word which means forbearance, fear, and abstinence. In Islamic sources, it can also be described as God consciousness, or piousness, or fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and is a spiritual compass that guides Muslims and is rooted in the teachings of the Quran and Ahlul Bayt. Now, I will be going to recite and translate and do a bit of tafsir depending on the time I've got from the Quran. Chapter number 3, verse number 102. Let's recite a loud salawat, please. Sorry, my IT is not great, so it's taking a few seconds to open up. Let's recite a salawat. As Sheikh Moiz has been saying, the more salawat we recite during these days, the more sawab we get. So, okay, chapter number 3, verse number 102. It says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu attaqullaha haqqan tukatihi wala tamutunna illa wa antum muslimun. Now the direct translation of this verse is, O believers, be mindful of Allah in the way He deserves, and do not die except in a state of full submission to Him. So the key words in this verse is Ataqullah, i.e. God. Guard yourself against evil, or take shelter in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Other key word is haqqa tukati, as it is due, or expected of you, or as God deserves to be feared of. Another keyword, wa antum muslimun. You be Muslims, i.e., those who submit themselves completely and willingly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not partly, completely. It is clearly indicated here that the one and only object of human life on earth must be the complete submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator and the Lord of the worlds. And this act in the Arabic language is called Islam. And most of the stuff I'm saying this morning is directly from the Quran and tafsir of Quran. A little bit where I feel I need to add or I want to add because of my passion, I will do so. So that was the tafsir of the first ayah which I have picked up from the Quran. The second ayah is the same chapter, chapter number 3, verse number 186. Chapter 3, verse number 86 says, لَتُبْلُنَّ فِي أَمْوَالِكُمْ وَأَنفُسِكُمْ وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ مِنَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ وَمِنْ الَّذِينَ أَشْرَكُوا أَذًّا كَثِيرًا وَإِنْ تَصْبِرُوا وَتَتَّقُوا فَإِنَّ ذَلِكَ مِنْ عَزْمِ الْأُمُورِ or umur. Now the direct translation of this verse is, you believers will surely be tested in your wealth and yourselves, and you will certainly hear many hurtful words from those who were given the scriptures before you and from the polytheists. But if you are patient and mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, surely but if you are patient and mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, surely this is a resolve to aspire to. So this was verse number 186. And going into the tafsir of this verse, because I've read the verse, its literal translation, and now starts the tafsir. The testing of human beings, like for example, Ayub alayhi salam, we know how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested Ayub alayhi salam. And Imam Hussain alayhi salam, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested Imam Hussain alayhi salam, and I'll come back to that after the talk when I'm discussing the tragedy of Karbala. Yunus alayhi salam, and nowadays human beings are still, nowadays this is still happening in a constitutional way, i.e. Muslims are still persecuted, and their properties confiscated, their lives have been mercilessly taken because they are Muslims. We just have to see the things happening in Gaza, in Sudan, in Yemen, and so many other places that the Muslims are being punished because they are Muslims. Also in Kashmir, Muslims are being persecuted by India. So, thirdly, I now recite another verse, chapter number 5, verse number 35. Per Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
It says, O believers, be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and seek what brings you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and struggle in His way so you may be successful. Now when the alims, the Maulanas and the sheikhs, they speak about taqwa very briefly. It's not something which you can attain in a day or two, a week or two, that you have taqwa. You come and say your prayers and do roza and try and get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All these things are obligatory. You have to be mindful, as I'm reciting from the verse, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching everything. We have two angels, one on the left and one on the right, who are noting down our acts. But in my experience, what I have seen, including myself, that as soon as we get out of the mosque, we get involved in all the worldly things and we forget about taqwa. That obviously is not good, and if we sin once we have done our obligatory things, it will not bring us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching, and after our obligatory performances, we have to adopt things which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes, and we have to shun or get away with things which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like. So this one was chapter number 5, verse number 35. The key words in this are wasila, i.e. means of approach to seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by obeying His commands and abstaining from everything forbidden. Therefore, wasila means of approaching a personality of very high position or status, a king or a minister, or the means to reach a high position, or an unapproachable height which otherwise could not be accessible. In case of approaching Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or any position of divine excellence, there cannot be any doubt about the means to it, being the Holy Prophet and the Holy Imams. Like we ask for our hajat from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we do say, because of the wasila of our imams, because of the wasila of our Prophet, so on and so forth. And people who do not believe in this, they say that, oh, you are asking to Hazrat Abbas, Bab al-Hawaii. You are going through the wasila of these pious people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And like, very simple example, that when I was about 15, 16 years ago, my father's car was parked outside, and I used to just go outside and start driving, and I wasn't a competent driver, and once I had an accident. And I was obviously very fearful that what will my father say. So I came home and I first approached my mother, please tell dad that, I had an accident, I'm sorry, so and so. So obviously you're going to your father through your dad because you're more closer to your mom or whatever. So in this case as well, we are not asking directly, we can ask directly, but our main purpose is to utilize the piousness of our imams who are masoons. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more likely to accept our du'as if we go through them. But Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad sallallahu. So going further into this same verse talking about wasila, if God had willed, He could have guided mankind by inspiring each one of us individually. But in His infinite wisdom, He had not deemed it desirable. He sent prophets, 124,000 since Adam alayhi salam was sent into the earth. This was to express His will to His creation through angels as intermediaries, and sometimes directly addressing emissaries or prophets, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addressed directly to Musa alayhi salam, to express His will to His creation. Those chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His will was revealed to His apostles, and chief of apostles being our holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
I need a bigger table, things are going all over the place. It's all right, pick it up. So, further on wasila, Allah's will was revealed to His apostles, and the chief of the apostles being the holy prophet, as I just said, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
The chief wasila or means to approach Him can be none but the holy prophet and those whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did commission to be His successors, i.e. the holy imams. The holy prophet had declared, the likeness of my Ahlul Bayt, the holy ones of the family, is like the ark of Noah alayhi salam, or Nuh alayhi salam. Whosoever got into it is saved, and whosoever stayed away from it is drowned and lost. And this is a hadith. Thus the wasila, or the means to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to faithfully follow the Holy Prophet and the holy Imams, who had always been on the right path, for they are the ones purified by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself. Chapter number 33, verse number 33 explains this further. Who were always guided by the revelation from God and the divinely inspired knowledge, who never in their lives yielded to falsehood. And what better example than the example of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, who gave up everything for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whose lives have always been a beacon of lights of knowledge and the divine guidance for mankind. It is not without justification and a purpose that the Holy Prophet seconded his parting caution to his followers, saying, I leave behind me two great things, the Book of Allah, i.e. the Holy Quran, and my progeny, i.e. my Ahlul Bayt. If you keep yourselves attached to these two, never will you get astray. These two, i.e. the Holy Quran and the Ahlul Bayt, will never be separated from each other until they meet me at the cistern of Kausar. This is what the Holy Prophet says. Can we recite it loud, Salwa, please?
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So now another verse, which is chapter number 9, verse number 119. Which says, it's a small verse, which says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu attaqullaha wa kunu ma'as-sadiqin. O believers, be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be with the truthful. This is verse number 119, chapter number 9. Now I will go through a bit of tafsir of this verse. This verse contains a very clear point of guidance for those who do not merely recite the Holy Quran, but sincerely and intelligently study the matter contained in it. Because most of us, including myself, we just recite the Holy Quran and we think that is sufficient. Of course, you get sawab for the recitation of Holy Quran, but do you really understand what you are reciting? Have we ever taken an effort to look at the tafsir of Holy Quran? How many people here do really study the tafsir of Quran on a regular basis? Hands up, please. Mulasa? MashaAllah. Anybody else? Abu Murtaza? MashaAllah. Dr. Hadi? MashaAllah. Anyway, the point I'm making is that, including myself, we must make an attempt to understand the Quran, and fortunately, this is all for me, fortunately, we recite the Quran every Saturday in the Fajr here, Alhamdulillah, and Abu Murtaza is our teacher, and we select a few verses of Quran, and after the recitation, in a very small way, we discuss the tafsir. Because whatever you can do is something better than nothing. Because at my age, of course, and people who are catching up with me, it's not very easy to learn new things. So if you start at an early age, the earlier the better. So that is very, very important to recite Quran, of course, and take a little bit of time out. You don't need tons of hours, You need maximum half an hour, even 20 minutes. Recite one verse, two verse, three verse, and then, of course, you'll get used to it. And the enjoyment you will get, you will only know then, not now, not before studying the verses. So now, obviously, it's because of the shortage of time, I will talk about the tragedy of Karbala, Imam Hussain alayhi salam, because the Arba'in is very near next week, and Imam Hussain alayhi salam, when he departed from Karbala, he was obviously persuaded not to go. But he said, no, I have to go. Then he was persuaded not to take the children and the wives, ladies especially, with him. But he said, no, I have to go with the kafla. So obviously I have to brief this up. As he came up, as the Imam Hussein's kafla came to Mecca, his original plan, I believe, was to do a Hajj. But because Yazid and his followers were bent to kill Imam Hussain alayhi salam, he only did an Umrah and headed towards Karbala. Now, in Karbala, what a tragedy by Imam Hussain alayhi salam. He was accompanied by, as I said, by the ladies, his children, and ashab. The water, Yazid and his obviously soldiers stopped the water and the food for 3 days. And Imam Hussain alayhi salam, this is the greatest tragedy in the history of mankind. His sons, his nephews, they started giving their lives and went to the battlefield and started fighting with Yazid. He started losing all of his family, like Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam, Qasim alayhi salam, Hazrat Akbar alayhi salam, and lastly only a child of 6 months he was left, and he was so thirsty that Imam Hussain alayhi salam took him to the battlefield and asked for the water for this young child, 6 months old, Ali alayhi salam. And instead of the enemies giving him water, they pulled an arrow on his neck, and 6 months child was martyred. And after that, Imam Hussain brings the 6-month child was martyred to the camps, and the mother of the child, he asked, Imam Hussain alayhi salam asks her that, promise me that you will be patient. And she promised. And then obviously Imam Hussain alayhi salam showed the child, and obviously she was shocked. Anybody would be. And Imam alayhi salam towards the end says, Inna lillahi, inna ilayhi raji'un, goes up and down 6 or 7 times, and his obviously intention was that I have given everything of mine for your pleasure. With this, because the time is up, I will end my talk and pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides us on the right path and keeps us on the right path, and we follow Quran and the teachings of Al-Ibad alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala
اللهم
Muhammad
صل
wa
على
ala
محمد وعلى